Next on VI and We, our host and political commentator Anthony Mardenborough Jr. will be talking Virgin Islands and national politics, while catching up with his next guest, legal entrepreneur and now delegate-elect to the 6th Constitutional Convention, Rudel Hodge Jr., since the 2024 general election and what drove him to enter politics, and what it means to represent young men in the paint. Tune in on Saturday, December 28th, 2024 at 5 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube at Active Advocates to watch this new episode. See you then.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of VI and We. I am your host and political commentator, Anthony Mardenborough Jr., and I want to thank you again for being with us this wonderful afternoon. We have a lot in store for today's episode. Our next guest is Rudel Hodge, which I'll bring on just shortly. But as you all know, first things first, we have to talk some politics before we dive into the interview section. Some interesting things occurred since the last time I was here, which was 2 weeks ago. But one of the pressing issues affecting Virgin Islanders now is waste management. That's always been an issue affecting people since its inception. To be honest, I don't think I was even born yet when waste management was formed. And if I was probably a year old or something. So waste management, is fairly new. And they've been going through some obstacles lately, which I think plays a role in the design of the because the agency in the first place because of its lack of funding. Another thing I would say about waste management though is, you know, there was a contractor vendor that decided not to continue working with the government to pick up trash in St. Croix Bates. But then the the um the waste management authority then turned around and said we're gonna try to find another vendor to carry out the services when a vendor that you just had just publicly came out and said that they're no longer working with you because you failed to pay that current vendor. The timing of that was just off. And I think Virgin Islanders are just frustrated because of energy. That's an issue in itself. The Waste Management Authority has become an issue because the lack of funding, they're not able to carry out their services, and it's questioning the purpose of the Waste Management Authority. So for those of you out there who might not know, the Waste Management Authority is a semi-autonomous agency, meaning it's responsible for making its own revenue, its own funding to be able to carry out the mandate required. So it's not supposed to depend on the central government's funds to operate. It's supposed to generate its own funds to be able to carry out its duties. Same thing like WAPA. It's a semi-autonomous agency. They have to generate funds to be able to carry out the services, water and power, right? Which is why we're called ratepayers when you pay WAPA for your services. The but the interesting thing is with semi-autonomous agencies is that they have a board of directors who hires the executive director, the CEO, whatever terminology they use for the head of that agency, um, to carry out the mandates and to do their job. So not only we have to look at the agency itself and try to figure out why the agencies are struggling, we have to also look at the board, the people who were tasked with hiring these individuals, and begin questioning them in terms of their practices. The Waste Management Authority has been struggling with finances, like I said, I think from the inception of it being created, when it was separated from Public Works and became its own instrumentality. I just think it goes to show revisiting and reevaluating the Waste Management Authority's practices and what you're doing and trying to figure out a solution that works, because we don't want this to become WAPA 2.0. We're here decades later, and people are paying some of the highest rates in the country, and we're not trying to figure out how we could resolve the issues. And I think another reason why people are upset is because of the lack of urgency from the PSC. The PSC is the Public Services Commission, and they're tasked with dealing with managing, providing oversight for our waste, electricity, telecommunications. So the PSC is responsible for providing that oversight to make sure that these agencies are not abusing the public, and it's just there's a lack of urgency of them meeting. They decided to schedule a public meeting for the Waste Management Authority all the way in February, but we're dealing with this issue now. What they fail to understand is several communities are going to now have to figure out how they're going to get rid of their trash. Because Bates, who primarily service the east side of the communities on St. Croix for trash, he just said that after December 31st, he's not going to service any more trash. He's not going to work with the government as a vendor to provide that service. So now all of those residents in that community has those communities have to now figure out how they're going to get rid of their trash. And it's just it's not only an economic concern, but it's a public health concern. When you have all of that trash piling up, fuming up the neighborhoods, you're increasing the amount of pests and insects and animals that are going to start coming around in the neighborhood. You have to really consider, not understand that the importance of every single service that the government provides. It has an importance, and waste management has an importance. And I'm going to even go broader for just a second. The landfill fires, that's something else. We have to figure out a way to make sure that we control our landfills and not have all these fires 24/7 and have to close schools and have to close businesses, and people have to stay in their homes because the landfill is going on fire 24/7. So I think the Waste Management Authority really needs to evaluate their current practices, what they're doing, and what they need to be doing to make sure that they are actually carrying out the mandate, but then at the same time, they're making cost effective decisions. And I just remembered one more thing. The sewage on St. Croix is also a problem. I know I've heard it's happening on St. Thomas as well in certain areas where the sewage is overflowing. Again, Waste Management Authority. Waste Management Authority is now just as big as WAPA in terms of issues right now, and people are just tired. They're tired, and they don't want to hear you're working on it, because that's a saying they use all the time. They don't want to hear working on it. What the people of the Virgin Islands want to hear is, we want this to be resolved. They want this to get done. And that's what they want. And rightfully so, because they're the ones who voted to choose these individuals who make these appointments. They're the ones who vote for their senators, which I'm coming to next. They have a responsibility. There's a committee that's responsible for oversight over waste. I believe it's now disaster recovery and infrastructure. It used to be under government operations. That committee has a responsibility to meet with the Waste Management Authority, even if it's not a public hearing, but to have a meeting to discuss solutions and actually put solutions into place so that people can begin to get some type of solutions, so that they could feel that the people that they chose are working for them. And that's what we need to be mindful of. That's what individuals who are elected are held responsible to do. That's part of your job. And even if you weren't elected, you are appointed by someone who was confirmed by someone who was elected. So it's a full circle, and you have to owe it to the people. Which is why it's called public service. And if you know you're not going to do that and be creative and come up with some solutions, I don't think this public service is for you. And if you're coming with that kind of mentality, not being ready to work and resolve the problems, we really have some tough times ahead. I want to dive into another discussion. So in the legislature, they drafted, I believe it was the 32nd 32nd. I believe it was the 32nd legislature, where they drafted the 32nd or the 33rd, the division of festivals, which is responsible for creating and promoting all of the festivals and carnivals across the the, the territory. They were responsible for doing that. And you know, they came under fire for the past couple of days now in terms of the lineup. A lot of people are saying they don't like the lineup this year for St. Croix. The lineup feels broke. It feels like there's not enough. There wasn't enough money to get enough entertainers, so that's why they had to shorten the amount of nights because the village is only going to be 6 nights. So, and then on top of that, about the three paid events, that were hosted in the village area. So this is my thoughts, and I was able to speak with the deputy commissioner of tourism, Shamari Haynes, today actually, and this is what I told him. The If you're going to do paid events during the carnival season, and the festival season, hosted by the division of festivals, it should not be in the village. The village is known as the area for free entry where people can come and get entertainment. It should not be a location where you're charging individuals or you're hosting events and charging individuals to come to the festive to the village to the events that's happening there. So that needs to be looked at. And the reason why I say that is because yesterday was the Calypso Monarch competition, and St. Croix, a lot of people didn't go. And usually, the older individuals is the ones who goes to these events. But the reason why they didn't go is because they had to pay, and it pay in the village area itself. So people need to really consider that wasn't really smart. I'll just say that it wasn't smart for them to host it in the village grounds. I think it needed to be hosted in another location where they can justify charging for someone charging people to come to the event. So, say for example, if they did it at Island Center, I could understand them charging people to attend the event because they have to pay Island Center to host it, if that makes sense, rather than they hosting it at the village where it's known to be free and then confusing people in trying to figure out what nights are free and what nights they have to pay. So the logistics of that did not make sense at all, and it needs to be fixed and looked at so it could better benefit the people. With that being said, that is it for. Oh, one more thing I wanted to just also mention. For those of you who don't know, the president is here in on St. Croix, and he's spending a couple of days here before he goes back to DC to finish out his term as president. So that's what's happening. Like I said, we have to just continue talking about politics because politics affects all of us, and we need to be aware of that. So we're gonna take a short minute break, commercial break. We're gonna come back on, and we're going to be able to begin interviewing our guests. So stay tuned with us.
Next on VIN our host and political commentator Anthony Mardenborough Jr. will be talking Virgin Islands and national politics, while catching up with his next guest, legal entrepreneur and now delegate-elect to the 6th Constitutional Convention, Rudel Hodge Jr., since the 2024 general election and what drove him to enter politics, and what it means to represent young men in the paint. Tune in on Saturday, December 28th, 2024 at 5 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube at Active Advocates to watch this new episode. See you then.
And we're back. Thank you for all of you all for sticking with us. So my next guest is an individual that rose to the scene during the 2024 general election cycle. He's actually one of the young individuals who were elected to the Sixth Constitutional Convention, which again, the people of the Virgin Islands were able to go out and choose individuals to represent them on the convention to be able to draft. Hopefully, this is the last constitutional convention that we have, but people to actually go out and choose their delegates to be able to make the decisions. But like I said, he's a young individual that rose to the scene in terms of politics because he's new, but we're looking forward to seeing what his journey is going to be like serving on the Constitutional Convention. But before I begin asking those questions, I would like to bring on Mr. Rudel Hodge. How are you doing, sir? You're muted.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Doing pretty good. Can't complain. Happy to be here. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm all right. I can't complain. So, for those of us who don't know who you are, can you kind of just give us a introduction of yourself, and let us know, you know, why you got into politics, but who you are, and then why you entered into politics.
Hey, absolutely no problem. So, again, my name is Rudel A. Hodge Jr. I was born on St. Thomas, went to Charlotte Motley High School, class of 2013. Went on to get my Bachelor's of Art degree from Binghamton University in upstate New York. Took a little gap year and then went on to get my law degree from FIU College of Law in Miami, Florida. After I graduated in 2022 from law school, I decided that just based on the current trends of the world, I wanted to return home and try my best to make this the most the best possible place possible. I To answer your secondary question of why entering into politics, I've always been a strong advocate of the Virgin Islands and a strong advocate of combating the brain drain the Virgin Islands face because of the modernization of the world. Right, a lot of our talent, stays here for the first 18, 20 something years of their lives, and then they go on
Mhm.
and do great things, and then spend 40, 50 years in the States and then come back home when it's a little too late. And that has caused that's a big gap in the Virgin Islands where we don't have a lot of that elite talent that the Virgin Islands has in those places that's making decisions for us. And then moreover, for the Constitutional Convention, when I became knowledgeable about this opportunity that was being presented in Virgin Islands history and just understand the demographic that I'm currently in, I'm a millennial. As people noticed, St. Thomas specifically didn't have enough people on the ballot itself. I was the youngest person who actually went out and got the required signatures to be on the official ballot. So I knew if I didn't put myself out there, who else would? And
Mhm.
as I change as someone who wants positivity and growth for the Virgin Islands, I know I had to put myself in those positions. So.
Yes, and I'm that's me. That's me in the whole in the flesh. That's why I even ran for the board of elections in the first place because, if nobody in my age group is going to go out there and try to make changes for our territory, then it has to be me. So it's a responsibility that I think a lot of people underestimate. But it takes some strong courage to be able to do that, which leads me to my next question. As a young black male in territory, what was your journey like during the cycle running for office?
So this was definitely a very interesting cycle. Again, the St. Thomas ballot itself didn't have enough candidates. So
Mhm.
prior to signing up for this, I had a whole extensive campaign plan. I was
Mhm.
expecting to have a lot more competition, but as
Mhm.
the days and the weeks got closer to the election, I kind of understand the lay of the land. I knew it was only 4 people vying on the official ballot.
Mhm.
Towards the end, I believe, let's say about October 15th, we
Mhm.
started to get some writing candidates, which made it a little bit
Mhm.
competitive. But it really was a race for seventh versus a race for the top, the top six. Um,
Mhm.
you know, was in a position I already had such a head start over those candidates that I didn't really
Mhm.
feel pressured per se for that. During my campaign, I did a lot of TV interviews. I focused primarily on social media to just have like a paper trail, or
Mhm.
a paper trail, so that someone who might not have known me or might not have
Mhm.
um, in my spirit influence was be able to go back and see like, oh, actually, for those months, he actually was doing something very consistently and showing who he is and what he does and why he should be in this position. So overall, I think it was a pretty, again, uncompetitive election season, but I was able to use that time to just network, put myself out there, and start building that coalition of fan base that would allow me to be successful in the near future.
Yes, yes, yes. And I just wanted to add for the public so that they are aware. So I live on the district of St. Croix, and usually that's the more competitive district. We had 20 candidates for senator, and we had, I think, like 16 candidates for the constitutional convention. So on this district, we're very competitive. That's our nature. But this year on St. Thomas, especially, the list, like you mentioned earlier, was very slim. It wasn't really much in any candidates, and I think it goes to the political apathy that people have on that district. They're not really interested in running. I think it plays a role in why they're frustrated with the system. And a lot of people didn't offer it up themselves to the point where I believe all incumbents except one for the district of senator got reelected. So I think it just goes to show either they're content with the representation they have across the district, or it's just they're not interested. But I'd like to know your thoughts. What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination. I think there is a disinterest in politics, especially in the St. Thomas St. John district currently.
Mhm.
But there's also interest in change.
Mhm.
But the change that's being provided is very similar to what's currently being had. So
Mhm.
now it's like, why would I vote a new person to do bad when I know the bad I'm getting from this person? All
Mhm.
right. That I also do believe that civic education is like at an all-time low in the Virgin Islands
Mhm.
historically, right? And that also plays a part in the disinterest in politics in the Virgin Islands.
Yes, I truly second on that. So what what were your three priorities that you ran on in the election, trying to convey to people why you should serve on the constitutional convention?
So I had three key pillars. One which is just being transparent and having a constitution that is very uh, it's a representation of the entirety of the Virgin Islands, right? Because
Mhm.
this is the supreme law. This is the highest law that the Virgin Islands will have, and
Mhm.
it has to be something that tells the story of the Virgin Islands, right? I
Yes.
also wanted to be an advocate for the younger generations, the millennials, the Gen Zs,
Mhm.
because currently we don't have a big footing in the political sphere of
Yep.
in the Virgin Islands, and making sure that our needs, our concerns are advocated for, because we are different than the previous generations. We have a
Mhm.
lot of different issues and opinions in terms of that's how things should be done, and just want to make sure I'm an advocate for those individuals, especially in this very monumental moment in Virgin Islands history.
Yes, and I second on that. If people know me, they know I'm an advocate for youth representation, and that we're having a footing. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I am passionate about, like I said, youth representation. But there was just some data that was published a few months ago, and young people haven't are not really voting. Especially in the millennial and the Gen Z administration generation. So
Mhm.
I would like to know your thoughts. What do you think some strategies that they can put in place to get younger people to vote, or at least be engaged?
I think one, okay, so going back to my previous conversation point on civic education, I think,
Mhm.
reintroducing civics in the public schools in a larger um, focus area, right, is very
Mhm.
important. That's one thing, because I think a lot of people are not knowledgeable about the system, right? A lot of people just go and get a voter registration card just to have a secondary ID for something, right? Versus
Mhm.
actually having knowledge to understand the different responsibilities, the different branches of government, and why voting is important, and why the Virgin Islands is a very unique place in just history, because we actually are one of the first places that Black people were able to vote for
Mhm.
a long part of their history, right? So that's very important, and I think we have kind of gone away from that important part of our history. I also just think millennials and Gen Zs are not seeing candidates that align with their core values, right? Why would I vote for somebody who doesn't have the same interests, wants, needs, or desires as me, right? And nobody's really taking that space in the political spirit, right? For the Virgin Islanders, it's typically males above 45, 50 years older who are running for these elected positions, right? And that kind of creates that disconnect where, again, why should I vote for somebody if I'm going to vote for them? They're not going to even address my core needs. Right? I'd rather not vote, or I'd rather just vote for the people that I kind of like, that might not even necessarily affect my life, but just because I have some type of knowledge of them, I think they have done something good previously, right? So again, thus giving millennials more options, Gen Zers more options that look similar to them, and also candidates just really not just saying that they care, but actually showing that they care and doing the things that's necessary that would combat the issues that the Gen Zers and the millennials are currently facing in the Virgin Islands currently.
I agree 100% on that. For those who don't know, I served on the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. I was the chairperson during the 34th legislature. We went through an interesting journey to even be able to meet and be able to discuss things. And so the priorities of youth representation in the government, I'm going to be quite frank, it's not there. And that's why a lot of times you see young people are not even interested, because the people who will represent them in government doesn't even look like them. We might have the same skin color, but age wise we don't look the same, and so the priorities are not the same. But one thing I'm gonna just continue telling young people is you have to vote. And you have to come out in numbers, because in politics it's all about numbers. I know it sucks, but it's the truth. It's about numbers. If you don't show up, they're not going to take your priorities seriously unless you have someone who's outspoken in your generation that's willing to put themselves up for service and be able to represent you. If not, you're not going to get your priorities accomplished, and you can't really expect them to, because they're not from your generation, even though that's what they should be doing. It's just they have different experiences, and we can't realistically expect someone who is 65 years old to understand what a 21-year-old is going through in 2024 and the priorities that that person has. So and this is not just something happening locally, but this is happening nationally as well. They had the two top candidates who were running for president just a couple months ago, Joe Biden and Trump, who are 80, 81 and 78. So there was no real new policies or new ideas that were being brought to the table, because these gentlemen are older. And then you just recently had Kamala Harris, who just turned 60. So yeah, she was a new light of fresh air, but she's not that far from them either. So it was no real young person really trying to take the mantle. And I think that's just nationally what's happening. Young people are not being interested because they don't feel valued, they don't feel appreciated, they don't feel their priorities are being met. And that's something that we're going to have to look at from even a legislative standpoint, putting some things into place to ensure that young people have their representation, or they at least have the opportunity to voice and be represented. But I want to go to the Constitutional Convention now. So I know of two individuals who are young, I think around your same age, who ran as writing candidates. They were chosen also, Akima Richardson and Imani Daniel. I know Miss Richardson because she was my vice chair and the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. But speaking from your perspective, what do you think the young people's priorities for the Constitution it should be? Or what do you think you were drafted to be?
Okay, so I think the one priority for us younger people is to make sure that this is the last Constitution Convention, right?
Yes.
That's priority number one. We do want this to be a successful endeavor. I think we're using this. This is actually one of the very first times in Virgin Islands history that there is a sizable youth
Mhm.
component of a constitutional convention.
Mhm.
And with that in mind, we are able to better leverage our skill sets with the older generation and be able to have that information, um, the information pathway of combining the two resources that we have, the older
Mhm.
generation with their knowledge, the young generation with our knowledge, and be able to create something that's truly representational of the Virgin Islands, right?
Mhm.
Also, just looking at the history of the Constitutional Convention, the last Constitutional Convention started in 2008 and then in 2012.
Mhm.
That's still the beginning of the smartphone generation. That's the beginning of social media, right?
Mhm.
We have us as younger delegates would have that experience and know how to manage and use those resources to make sure
Mhm.
that this is a convention that people are knowledgeable and the information will be publicized in readily available mechanisms such as Facebook posts or YouTube videos or TikToks, right? Which would not have happened in previous generation. That
Mhm.
would not happen if us, me, Akima, and Imani
Mhm.
was elected to this position. So we definitely have priorities of making sure that one, that this is a successful convention. We do not want a
Mhm.
separate constitutional convention.
No.
This is the goal is to make sure that this is most successful, and we do have a document that is one approved by Congress, and then two approved by the people of the Virgin Islands in 2026.
Agreed, because we don't need, and like I said it earlier before we even started, we don't need a seventh one. I think we've done five. This is about to be the sixth one, and I think the sixth constitutional convention, you will have a lot of advantages because not only social media, but you've had five different documents that have been done before, and
Mhm.
you have the revised organic act. So I think there's some leverage that can be done, and it's to your advantage. So I think people are just ready to get this constitution out of the way, get this done, so that we could begin even talking about status, which is something that is close in conversation with the Constitutional Convention. So, but before I get to status, though, I want to just ask you: do you think it would be wise for the Constitutional Convention to consider using some or if not all of the revised Organic Act, which has been the document governing us since 1954?
I think personally, I think that it's portions of the revised organic act that
Mhm.
work that make sense. However, I don't think it should be just copy and paste it holistically onto the sixth constitution draft and be like, this is the document that we submitted to Congress and let's have it approved, for a variety of reasons. One,
Mhm.
if we wanted that, we should have been done that. Point blank,
Exactly.
right? Clearly,
Mhm.
that's not what we wanted, right? So why
Yeah.
would I go against the will of the people and do that? Because certain there is a sect of people who would say that's a viable option, and it is a viable option.
Mhm.
However, it's not the will of the people, right?
Mhm.
Two, I do think, as you mentioned, there are five other draft constitutions that Virgin Islanders before me
Mhm.
worked on and created, and there are parts that work, parts that don't work, and parts that can be improved. That I think when you
Mhm.
combine all those factors plus the wealth of knowledge that we have now, I'm sure in 2008 to 2012, right, it was much harder to find all the constitutions in the world. Right now,
Mhm.
with a snap of a finger, right,
Yep.
and be able to do comparison research and be able to find what actually works for nations and territories that are similar to us, right? And be able
Mhm.
to fine tune it to the needs of the Virgin Islands, right? So I think right now it makes sense to use portions, but a
Mhm.
full-on copy and pasting of that document, I think, does a disservice to the Virgin Islands.
Agreed. So, and I really wanted to ask that because that was a lot of conversations happening across the territory. Should the Constitutional Convention use the Revised Organic Act, or should they take sections, which I agree with? They take sections, they look at what sections work and which ones don't work, or which ones that can be improved. And same thing with the draft. The drafts that they have, they do the same thing, look at what works and what doesn't, and just do it like that. And I think it'll be even more comprehensive, because you're not only including the voices now, but you're including the voices from the past and what individuals in the past wanted, in the constitutional convention. So I think that's a great way to go about achieving a document that, if not 100%, at least 85% or at least 80% of the territory agrees with in what we want to govern us, basically.
Right.
Yes. So now heading into um so basically you guys are going to be policy makers. Tech That's essentially what you're going to be. And yes, pretty much. And so what do you think your relationship what do you think the constitutional convention's relationship is going to be like with the legislature, because they are the lawmakers of the territory? So what do you think the relationship is going to be like, at least
I,
for the 36th legislature?
I hope for a very collaborative relationship between the 36th and the 6th Constitutional Convention. I do think we are better served if we work together
Mhm,
and collaborate and make sure that we are working on the similar accords and working
mhm,
in union, in sync with each other, so we could have this document created that will be the supreme law of the Virgin Islands, right?
mhm,
And I think it's very important that we develop those relationships, and make sure that we are on the same page. We are having some conversations, understanding. I think that the 36 legislative input, not
mhm,
as senators but as individuals who are still
mhm,
a part of personalities, are very important. And I'm looking forward to the conversations with the senators to see what they're seeking, what they're looking for, what things that they enjoyed from the fifth draft, what
mhm,
things enjoyed from the revised organic act, what things that ideas or innovations that they might even be considering that myself might not consider, or somebody else who's on
mhm,
delegation might not consider. Because again, I like to call this as a large group project. While yes,
mhm,
I'm one of the 50 people who kind of gets to decide what goes into the group project, every
mhm.
Virgin Islander until October 31st, 2025 should be involved in this project to make sure that we have a document that's representational of the people of the Virgin Islands. Because without a document that's representational of the people of the Virgin Islands, it should not be the supreme law of the Virgin Islands. That's that's
Agreed.
that's just the simple facts about it, right? So I
Yeah.
do hope for strong collaboration between the Sixth Constitutional Convention delegates and the 36th legislature senators, also with the governor,
Mhm,
because we need buy-in from all parts of government.
mhm,
I would love to see some collaboration with the Department of Education to make sure that civic education is brought into the schools on a very targeted level, discussing what a constitution is and why we
mhm.
are at this point, and just making sure that those things are aligned, that we have education at multiple stages, so we
Mhm.
have the best results at the end.
Yes, I second that. And I think a lot of what you're saying is just common. It's what's needed, and a lot of times in politics, the Virgin Islanders hear fairy tales all the time, but it's about time they really hear some real common sense approaches to getting the agenda completed, because that's what we want. And like I said, we're tired of the bashing and we're tired of that. We want results, and we want to see things getting done and being completed, and making sure that voices are heard, and that we can respectfully disagree if we disagree on something. And I think that's what people want. People want to see that. People want to be able to have confidence in the people that they chose to represent them. But even when we talk about the constitutional convention and different issues, one of the things that always comes up is the structure of the legislature. And you don't really have to tell me your position vividly now, but that's always been a conversation. How or the Constitution going to keep the structure of the legislature, which is 15 senators, seven from each district, and one at large, or if the legislature is going to look different? Are they going to have all at large senators, or if they're going to have different districts within a district? So, do you think that if you all are planning to change, or if you guys think about changing the structure, what would need to be done in order to consider a structure change like that?
Well, I do think this Constitutional Convention is a perfect place to change structure because again, this is
Mm-hmm.
a supreme law. This is the highest level law that will be drafted. This everything comes below this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I I do think that it's a need to revisit our structure. Personally, I do. It was a very good op-ed posted in either the Daily News, the Via Consortium that talks about, our legislative system is basically a 2-year project where by the end of the first year you're just competing against your peers to see if you get
Mm-hmm.
real, right? So there's
Mm-hmm.
no real time for collaboration, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, and not necessarily turnover, but the phases of it kind of shows.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's not a true representational person that you're seeking in this, right? So you're vying against everybody for the same votes. I would
Mm-hmm.
personally, this is my personal opinion, I do think
Mm-hmm.
that districting is very important, especially having districts of the territories,
Mm-hmm.
because then the districts will have their representational person that says,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I am from the west side of St. Thomas. These are our needs. These are our concerns. This is the
Mm-hmm.
agenda that the west side of the Virgin Islands needs, right? How can we
Mm-hmm.
work with the east side of the Virgin Islands to get it done versus this kind of like Hail Mary that you're just trying to figure out which senator actually cares about you enough to
Mm-hmm.
get the things necessary for the region that you live in, because we have regional differences. What someone needs
Mm-hmm.
in the east side versus what we need in the west side is completely different. What someone needs in the south side and the north side is completely different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it makes the most sense to have, you know, senators that represent districts, right,
Mm-hmm.
versus just a whole island. And I think it's time to also look at other systems,
Mm-hmm.
in the United States and across the world, and see what systems works for a population size that's similar to us, right? And kind of figure out, because again, the Revised Organic Act is a document that's over 60 years old, and
Mm-hmm.
it the idea works in principle, but it's not the most efficient and effective idea in 2024. And it's time for us to revise and change it. And this is the perfect opportunity to get those changes pushed through and become law.
Yes, and like I said, I wanted to just ask that because a couple years ago we had a whole reapportionment initiative that was on the ballot, and it wasn't approved. It didn't reach the majority of votes it needed. So,
Mhm.
and that's been one of the conversations that people have been having, even as soon as they approved for us to have a sixth constitutional convention. That was immediately one of the topics that came to the mind of people. How we can restructure the legislature, or does it need to be restructured at all? And so that's something that people have been considering and talking about for quite some time. So another issue that people were looking forward to, at least on the St. Clair district, were looking forward to being considered or being worked out, is land. Land has become a big issue, not only here but across the world, about land that native Virgin Islanders should be entitled to, or native individuals of that place should be entitled to because they're native. And one of the reasons why the one of the previous constitutions didn't get adopted was because of the land issue, and where they kind of took that approach, defining ancestral, native, and all those different terminologies. So I would just like to know your thoughts, as someone in the legal world. What do you think, what approach would be best for the Constitution to resolve that issue? Because at some point it will come up about land. So what approach do you think the convention should take in addressing the land issue in terms of the Constitution?
It's definitely a very complicated legal issue,
Mm-hmm.
because on one end, right, it's fundamentally illegal to give a special privilege to any group in a
Mm-hmm.
constitution, right?
Yes.
So it will be very difficult to even get it approved. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
remember, NLB all, we are still a U.S. territory,
Yep.
right? And Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution gives the right to Congress to approve measures for territories, which we
Mm-hmm.
are, all right?
Yep.
And the U.S. Constitution clearly states that you cannot have that's an equal protections issue,
Mm-hmm.
and it will just be struck down very quickly
Yep.
if it was somehow miraculously approved. It will get brought up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, especially with the demographic that it has currently, will be like,
Mm-hmm.
this is unconstitutional. And then now we kind of back in square one. Now we have an
Yep.
unconstitutional constitution that we will either have to amend or have that part stricken out, or whatever the
Mm-hmm.
case may be. The Supreme Court would decide at that point. But there are mechanisms that you can protect Native rights with treaties.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The United States have many treaties with natives, Native Americans, Native American people, right? And I think that's a avenue that can be explored, right? And then we do still have the Department of Interior, right? That also can be used as a resource to make sure that Virgin Islands land rights are protected in perpetuity. All right. So we could have those protected rights for Virgin Islanders, because I do think it's very important that we do protect the rights of Virgin Islanders, especially with property rights, especially that based on the language of the documents that was created via the sale of the U.S. Virgin Islands to the United States from Denmark. So I think it is a complicated issue. It's definitely something that we will explore as a delegation. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with the legal minds in the delegation and beyond delegation, because we will be using outside help for a variety of different things. That's an important part of the convention. And we'll kind of figure out what will be the best case scenario and best solution for that issue. But it is a very important issue. And like you said, it's one of the reasons why the fifth constitution didn't pass.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that, and I wanted to just ask that because that's always been an issue, coming up about how the Constitution can protect Virgin Islanders in terms of their land, but without infringing on that section of the Constitution, like you pointed out. So I just wanted to ask that because that's always been a discussion, or that's always been a conversation about land and what really considers a Virgin Islander, and all of those different things, which you really can't do. So that's one, like I said, one of the reasons why the last one did not make it far. We don't have a constitution because that's one of the reasons why. So I wanted to just ask that. Um, no status. I mentioned that I talked about. I was going to ask a question about status a little earlier. So as when once the constitution gets drafted, and I'm really hoping that this is the one that we actually agree to, and that we don't have to be here again with a 7-1. I really don't, and I think it'll be a disservice to the people of Virgin Islands if we gotta go through a 7-1 again, a next one. So hopefully this is, like I said, and I know you have the same viewpoints, that this is the last one we do, and that we actually could get a document that can reflect who we are as people. But status, that is another issue that's not too far from the Constitution. What status are we looking at? Are we planning to stay unincorporated territory? Are we going to push for statehood? Are we going to be free association? So just your personal thoughts. What do you think this status should be, and why?
Okay, so with having a constitution, we will become an incorporated territory, because that's the difference between unincorporated and incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
Incorporated territory is a territory that doesn't have a constitution, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And the incorporated territory is a territory that has a constitution. So
Yeah.
automatically, we will move status-wise once this document is approved. So that's one. In terms of becoming a state, or becoming like a free associated nation with the United States, or becoming an independent country, all those things I believe are possible, but with planning, right? I have this analogy: the Virgin Islands has been given a lot of apples throughout its life.
Yep.
Right? And we love our apples. We eat the apples. And we keep getting them, right? But we have never really planted the seeds from the apples to grow our own trees. So until we have that thought of planting those seeds, right? we are not going to be able to do any of those things. We are not in the position for any of those places right now. Because if we try to become a state, there's a lot of issues with us becoming a state, especially because of our size, population. How are we going to afford for things? Because we will not have the same benefits that we currently have as a territory, as a state. Now you're going to be like become a paying member of the United States versus this kind of, this kind of situation that we are as in a territory. Because a sovereign nation is also another hurdle, because then we think about military protection, making sure that we are able to be self-sufficient, and the Virgin Islands does not produce enough food for itself, right? We don't have any exports. We are import. We input. We require a lot of inputs to be able to sustain our quality of life, right? And also we don't have any naval vessels to be able to work as a seafaring nation in the middle of the Caribbean. So again, until we work towards those things, status is a question that it's good to think about, right? We should think about where we want to go, right, and how we want to go there. But until we kind of figure out the plan to get there, right, it kind of it should not be the focus of this convention. And the law is very clear that status is not going to be considered during this constitutional convention, but I do think it will be considered in the future, especially probably after this convention has drafted a constitution and the Virgin Islands is approved. Then we can start having conversations of like, all right, now we want to negotiate our standing in the global sphere, right? Because right now we are in unincorporated territory of the United States, but that doesn't always have to be the case. We can, go a variety of different ways, but we have to go in a way that makes sense for the majority of the Virgin Islands.
Agreed. And I think that's the approach. And when I used to say people disagreed with me that we can't just rush into status because first, like you mentioned, independent country, we are no capability of being an independent country. We don't have a good running hospital. Our schools are not where they needs to be. Our military, in terms of sea, is not as strong. So we wouldn't last as an independent country. I honestly believe somebody will just come in and just swoop in and take charge of us again, and we don't want that. And then all the other things that you mentioned, it does play a role, because if we're free association, we can't just rely on the US government to just give us a bunch of money to continue doing things. We have a relationship where our people were able to still go to the United States and be able to traverse freely, but the dependency that we have on the federal government right now does not put us in any position to be independent or free associated. So we really have to sit and think about status, and I think status should be focused on and separately from the Constitution, because status is something that, again, will need people to actually be able to sit down. If we have the whole territory to discuss status, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think there needs to be a committee, or a group or a commission or whatever, which will have to be legislated, to really consider status, and not just us drafting a status commission and then the first one failed and then here we go again with a second. Not like that. Just a good group of individuals who can get it done. And then we put it out to the Virgin Islands, and it shouldn't be something done in like 2 years. I would say at least a good 4 to 5 years to really consider the resources, consider the way that we're in right now, what the advantages and disadvantages would be for each particular one, and really prepare ourselves for whatever one we decide to do. And I think that's part of the problem. The Virgin Islands, we like to rush things, and then we got to go back and fix it. And we got to go back and fix a lot of the things that could have been avoided if we just took our time in the first place. And so that's kind of where I need people to understand the Constitution and status is two important different things. and you can't try to do them at the same time, then you can't rush it. It's just it has to be done and it has to take time because all of these things are legal documents or legal things that um we will have to enforce and do in the future. So people need to be mindful and aware of stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um but with that being said, we have 5 more minutes left um of this show. So I'm gonna ask about two more questions and then I'm gonna do a rapid fire, which is me just basically asking you questions about different topics affecting Virgin Islanders and just getting your thoughts on it as a citizen.
No.
So my second to last question in regards to the Constitutional Convention is what do you think collectively the priorities for St. Thomas and the Constitution will be? What do you think it'll be as an individual?
For the collective issues that the St. Thomas
Mm,
delegates particularly will
yes.
have, I think,
Mhm,
again, going back to the very first issue, I think, and that's one thing I'm very proud of my fellow delegates. All my delegates that I have personally have had conversations, one of the
mhm,
things they want is to make sure that this is the last time that we have a constitutional convention. And I think that's very
mhm,
important because if we all have that goal in mind, I think the collaboration and the compromise that's necessary needed to make sure that this is the last will happen. Uh,
mhm,
but in terms of just St. Thomas, I think, that's conversation points. I think, redefining government, structure,
mhm,
structure needs, environmental protections. Those are like some of the key
mhm,
issues, education. Those are some of the key issues that the St. Thomas delegates have had conversations with me about, and I've had conversations with St. Thomas delegates about. Just making sure those key things are kind of addressed in this fifth constitutional draft because those areas are some of the areas that the Virgin Islands needs the most improvements in.
yes. And my last question in regards to the convention is what what do you foresee in the next year serving on the Constitutional Convention? Because you're about to be sworn in, I believe, next month.
Yes.
Yes. So, what do you foresee the next year being on the Constitutional Convention being like?
Okay, so I will be sworn in on January 28th, 2025. After
Mm-hmm,
being sworn in, we're going to elect our executive board. You have a president, vice president,
mm-hmm,
treasurer, secretary, so forth and so on. We will then be kind of assigned into different committees.
mm-hmm,
And we have until October 31st, 2025 to create our sixth constitutional draft, which would then be known known as the Virgin Islands Constitution once it passes the rigors that it has to,
mm-hmm,
from us to the governor, who ceremonially, signs it off to Congress, who signs off the president, and then the president signs it off to Congress. Congress votes on it, and it gets kicked back down to us. Then we will vote on it in 2026. So
mm-hmm,
for this next year, starting from today, December 28th to December 28th, 25, we'll be, drafting the document, educating the populace about the document and the importance of this document, right? Making
mm-hmm,
sure that we have public forums so we can get the community engagement that creates a
mm-hmm,
comprehensive and reflective document for the entirety of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Because, as you mentioned before, while we do have the fifth and we have the revised Organic Act, right? Those Virgin Islanders, either are not here or aging out, right? Their
mm-hmm,
values are now no longer the same values that are currently held in the
mm-hmm,
populace, and we must reflect the current needs of the populace and also the needs of the future, right? I do want a document that is not necessarily future proof, but
mm-hmm,
future thinking, like thinking about that eventually these things will have to be changed because what has worked for us now might not work in the future, and making sure that it's really able to be maintained. I think my personal belief is I come from
mm-hmm,
a school of thought that constitutions should be living documents, so
mm-hmm.
they are updating with the needs of the
Yep.
people. And there's some people who feel that constitution should just stay the same, right? I think this
Mm-hmm,
should be a balance, right? Because
mm-hmm.
you can't lean too far on either side, but we want to make
Exactly.
sure that there is parts that make it sure it's a living, breathing document, and there are parts that are not necessarily hard to change, but core
Mm-hmm.
values that are necessary to maintain democracy, freedom, rights, so forth and so on. All right.
Yes.
So the next year is going to be, like I said, a large group project with a lot of Virgin Islanders. I'll be specifically working with 14 other Virgin Islanders to make sure that the needs, the wants, the concerns of the Virgin Islands are addressed in this document. That will be our supreme, the highest level law of the Virgin Islands that will affect us throughout the rest of our natural lives, and the generations to come. Once
Yeah,
and
it sounds like you have a lot of work ahead of you.
Sure.
Yeah, you will have to present something by October of
Yes.
2025, and so you all have a lot of work ahead. I think, like I said, people of Virgin Islands, we're here to support you guys to get this done because we want the Constitution as much as you all want it. We want it as well, so that we could be able to have that we have a constitution. I believe we're the only yes, we're the only U.S. territory as of right now that does not have
There's
a
two.
oh,
So it's us and
and
Guam. Guam.
Guam, yes, that does not have a constitution. The other three do, and so we're behind. We're behind, and we need to be getting somewhere so that we could at least have some type of establishment of what we are, and that we don't have to go through Congress. And that's what we need to understand. We don't have to go to Congress every minute if we want to change something in the revised organic act. We have a constitution that could be amended by the lawmakers, which are the people elected in the legislature. That's why it's so important to have the constitution, because without it, the process of amending the document that governs us, which is the revised organic act, it takes work. You have to draft a resolution, then the resolution has to be sent to the governor, and then the governor has to sign it or whatever, and then it has to go to Congress to get Congress to that is a lot of work. Prime example, um elected attorney general. That has always been becoming an issue
Yeah.
recently. Should Virgin Islands be able to elect their own attorney general? And resolutions were proposed, and it failed and failed and failed. But even if it was to pass, Congress could say no. So that's something that people need to understand, that us having a constitution makes amending the document that formed our government, or just the document that now lives as the, like you said, the supreme law of the Virgin Islands. It makes it easier to amend it rather than having to go to Congress every minute to ask them to amend it. So that's something people need to understand. But my three topics for a rapid question is education. Because
Okay.
education has been facing some pressing issues lately. Schools been closed a lot lately. The infrastructure has been dealing with the infrastructure is aging, and teachers are leaving, quitting. The rates, the amount of teachers working at the different schools is very low, and our students, their academic rates are not as high as it should be. So, what do you think the priorities for education should be, just as a regular Virgin Islander? What do you think the priority should be?
Okay, so as a regular Virgin Islander, who has no kids, but I will try my best. I think education has to be a central portion
Mhm.
of Virgin Islander, right? We should be one of the most educated Black republics in the world, right?
Mhm.
This should be something that should be our bread and butter, because education creates talent, which creates
Mhm.
resources, which creates betterment for the entirety of the society, all right?
Mhm.
In terms of our age and infrastructure, we had a very tough last 7 years relatively.
Mhm.
We had Maria in 2017, right, which already basically destroyed our at least from the St. Thomas side, um, Charlotte Motley High School, right,
Mhm.
our major middle school at um, Concrine, right,
Mhm.
and then we have shortly right after we have the COVID pandemic. So you basically
Mhm.
have 7 years of reduced educational capacities, right?
Mhm.
Um, right now, Claire, we know we are getting towards the end of this
Mhm.
process of getting the monies from FEMA to start rebuilding the schools and rebuilding
Mhm.
the educational systems in the Virgin Islands. And I'm looking forward to seeing when those plans and those funds are released and executed, and how long it takes for those things to be executed. I think it's going to be very interesting to see, because as the government always says, we don't have the workforce, so then we have to get
Mhm.
imported labor to do this. Right now, I do believe that a lot of our teachers in the educational system are imported laborers, which is
Mhm.
another factor there. So we do need to come up with innovative solutions, all right?
Mhm.
Because the solutions that we've been trying so far are not working for us and have kind of put us in this position where we are kind of fallen way behind, and we need to figure out a way to get a turbo boost and get back to the place that we need to be as one of the smartest educated Black populations in the United States of America.
Yes. Transportation. Transportation is another issue, especially with the taxis. The taxi cab commission has been under fire for a couple of months now in terms of the taxi industry, and right now the ride share industry in the territory is starting to boost up a bit, even though it's happening illegally because there's no legislation vividly spelling out what the right share industry or regulation should be. So,
Correct.
what are your thoughts on transportation as a whole in the territory and what we can do to fix it?
I am a strong believer that government should be in the business of providing transportation, because when you have
Mhm.
transportation, you have commerce. When you have commerce, you have good government, because now you have
Mhm.
people spending money and then you're getting people taxed and so forth and so on. So you should
Mhm.
be in the business of transporting people. The Virgin Islands transportation is abysmal, right?
Mhm.
It pains me that our taxi association has never really thought about, okay, why don't we become the right share of the Virgin Islands and have
Mhm.
our taxi association be a web-based application that can be
Mhm.
ported to iPhones and Androids? Why did we not make this investment, when we saw these things happening across the world, right?
Mhm.
Because I have friends and peers. Like I said, I went to the States for my education, and I have been
Mhm.
a ambassador of the Virgin Islands. I tell everybody, don't go to Jamaica, come to the Virgin Islands. Don't do
Mhm.
that. But when they come here, they see, you know, one, it's hard to get transportation, because then you have to find the taxi driver, you have to find a taxi number, you have to make sure that they want to come to you. And then the Virgin Islands is a pretty difficult terrain to travel some places. And,
Mhm.
you know, I do feel for the taxi man who has a 20-person van, has to go up a steep mountain to pick up one person, right?
Mhm.
Where we should have variety of different levels of transportation, you know,
Mhm.
such as like the Uber type system where you have Uber X's and so forth and so on, that could be
Mhm.
provided by the tax association if they want to continue having that strong grip that they have. Also,
Mhm.
digital payments, right? Our tax association is very against digital payments for whatever reasons,
Mhm.
right? And that needs to be one legislated out, that they have to accept all
Mhm.
legal means of payment, right?
Yes.
Be able to create a situation that the consumer actually can access the product,
Mhm.
right? Because currently the product is only for a specific consumer, right? And that's not fair to the Virgin Islands. So that, right? Then we could talk about public transit. Public
Mhm.
transportation needs to be improved. I think
Yes.
all public buses should be on a GPS. I
Mhm.
had very recently was our safaris. Safaris should be
Mhm.
documented on like a map where you can see
Mhm.
how far the nearest safari is from your stop using an
Yes.
app. So you can be able to just pull up your phone and be like, okay, a safari should be coming here in the next 10 minutes. I could go out to the bus stop and be at the bus stop at the time, or the safari is coming in
Mhm.
25 minutes, similar to like the MTA of New York or Chicago,
Mhm.
and so on, right? Improving those areas because we need transportation. Also, I do think the first knowledge in this next renaissance of development has
Mhm.
to prioritize walkability, right?
Mhm.
Sure
Yes.
that streets have sidewalks that are protected, that both pedestrians in cars, right, and
Mhm.
walk and use these streets. I think the Virgin Islands has did this a huge disservice by becoming so reliant on cars as our
Mhm.
primary means of transportation, that is created this issue in this Virgin Islands that we need to address in the next iteration, because we can no longer kind of exist in the system that we currently have.
Yes. And my last topic is, of course, the Water and Power Authority. That that will never go anywhere. And like I tell people, I don't have a problem with the people who are behind the scenes trying to make sure the power is on and that the water is being provided. My issue is with the leadership and the decisions that they continue to make. We pay one of the highest rates in the country in terms of electricity. What are some of your ideas? What do you think the Water and Power Authority should do to help bring some relief to Virgin Islands?
Well, I'll be very honest, right? If you know the history of WAPA, WAPA was created in, I believe, 1969, right? By
Mm-hmm,
the Act, right? I think it's, WAPA is like a car, right? It's
mm-hmm,
like, it was a nice, a very nice Bentley back in the day, but
yeah.
it's 60 years old. And in order for your Bentley to be nice in 2024, you have to maintain it properly. And maintenance has
Mm-hmm,
never actually happened. So now we are driving around. Yes, this very nice 1969 Bentley
mm-hmm,
broken down to a
yep.
point irreparable. Right. So I am a strong advocate that we should be decommissioning, bringing WAPA down, and starting our next Water and Power Association that should be focused on renewable energies. Right.
Mm-hmm,
Bring one environmental awareness, environmental protections, environmental resources, because we're surrounded by ocean. So we
mm-hmm,
get trade winds and we get a
mm-hmm,
lot of sunlight. So why are we not tapping into the resources that God has provided us in the
mm-hmm,
territory? Says imported propane and natural gas oils from countries who don't care about us, that only care to see us as a dollar amount to them, when we could be producing our own energy and power here in the territory if we build towards that. And I think that the best way is having a 5 year or 10 year plan. In 10 years, this place is getting shut down. And in these 10 years, we're going to be building this next station that's going to be doing these things, right? I also do think we should be having more microgrids
mm-hmm,
and updating our building laws to require some type of solar initiative moving forward,
mm-hmm,
because we don't have the infrastructure to continue building the way we're building right now
mm-hmm.
with the way it is.
Agreed, and I actually like that perspective of you know setting a plan 10 years from now. This is what we're doing. WAPA, you have 10 years to start lowering down the production of these things so that we could begin transitioning. I think that's a great way to approach that. And so that we're not just shutting off WAPA and then people are stuck without electricity, but WAPA now knowing that in 10 years we're gonna basically start new, and we're not starting with propane and this. We're starting with renewable energy. And if that means we need to restructure how the current WAPA agency is, so be it. But there has to be some level of movement to renewable energy, and we now have a real advantage, especially with the amount of technology that we have, that we can use to our advantage. I think is a great direction to go. But I actually like that idea of setting a timeline of when they need to start shutting down things so that we could begin moving forward in the renewable energy. And I think that timeline also gives us the opportunity to start building the renewable energy infrastructure. So when we're ready to transition from the propane and the gas to the renewable energy, it's not a long wait for that, because that's the next thing Virgin Islands could do. We could say we're gonna do something and then we do it, or we put it in place, then we gotta wait 10 more years for the actual thing that we were trying to do to come up. So during that timeline, they could actually begin to flow line to create the line to be able to get it done. So as soon as they finish, they could be able to easily transition. But my last question for you is what's next for you politically after the Constitutional Convention? What are you thinking?
Um, Currently, again, my focus is going to be on the convention.
Mhm,
Potentially might run for senator in 2026 because it does make the most sense.
mhm.
And from there, we'll see where my political aspirations go from that
Yeah,
point.
So I want to thank you for being on the show. Today I want to thank the public for tuning in and watching VI and We. This is our second episode. It's about to end, but I hope you all join us next week, not next week, the following week, on January 11th. We have two individuals that will be joining us. We have Dr. Cleopatra Peter, who was just elected to the Board of Elections, and we have Karen Dickinson, who's a community activist, and they're going to be joining us to talk about her being elected to the board, Karen's work in the community, and what People's Choice, which is the big movement on St. Croix, was able to do in getting at least three candidates who ran under their banner elected for office. So I look forward to that conversation. You all can tune in right here on Facebook, 5 p.m. Facebook, YouTube, and WSTX 970, where we're going to have the closeout video, and then I will see you all next time.
Next on VI and We, our host and political commentator Anthony Mardenborough Jr. will be talking Virgin Islands and national politics, while catching up with his next guest, legal entrepreneur and now delegate-elect to the 6th Constitutional Convention, Rudel Hodge Jr., since the 2024 general election and what drove him to enter politics, and what it means to represent young men in the paint. Tune in on Saturday, December 28th, 2024 at 5 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube at Active Advocates to watch this new episode. See you then.